The defense's goal: to try to poke enough holes in Cohen's credibility and testimony about Trump's involvement in the conspiracy to falsify business records to cover up the $130,000 payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 presidential election. We saw some of that yesterday in Trump attorney Todd Blanche's dramatic first go at Cohen, where he spent hours attempting to paint Cohen as a liar who was just out for revenge against his former boss, even trying to use Cohen's own words against him. For instance, Blanche said, "You referred to President Trump when he left the courtroom. You said he goes right into that little cage, which is where he belongs, in an effing cage, like an animal. Do you recall saying that?" To which Cohen replied, "I recall saying that." Following the cross-examination, which will likely finish before the end of the day, the prosecution is expected to rest its case following any redirect. The defense has already indicated it might not put on any defense at all and might not call any witnesses. As of yesterday morning, the defense said they didn't know if their client was going to testify, something Trump isn't required to do, but has said he would absolutely do.
Yeah, I would testify, absolutely. It's a scam. It's a scam. I'm testifying. I tell the truth. I mean, all I can do is tell the truth. And the truth is that there's no case. They have no case.
Of course, Trump has made similar claims that he would testify in some of his other legal matters, and he never did. This all means that the first criminal trial of a former president of the United States could come to a close as early as the beginning of next week with closing arguments. Then it will be up to the minds and hands of the 12-member jury to deliberate and return a verdict. Joining me now to discuss is Catherine Christian, former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst, Jill Wine-Banks, former Watergate Assistant Prosecutor and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, and Omarosa Manigault-Newman, former Trump White House aide and author of Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House. Thank you all so much for starting us off with the show today. Catherine, I want to start with you on this. So Cohen's going to testify again tomorrow. The defense is saying, this is probably our biggest chance, our biggest get. Where are they right now? Do they have Michael Cohen on the ropes? Does this appear to be a situation where they're knocking down the main witness? Where do you think they stand? Where do they seem like they think they stand?
They don't have him on the ropes. What they've successfully done, if you can call that, is bring out some information about the hatred of Donald Trump that Michael Cohen has, and he just needs to own that wasn't brought out by the prosecution. And the prosecution did a very good job of bringing out Michael Cohen's convictions and other information. But they have a whole day tomorrow. What they're trying to do is not just poke holes. They're trying to destroy Michael Cohen's testimony. They're going to be charged, the jurors are going to be charged at the end of the summations, that if they don't believe witnesses' testimony in one material fact, they can disregard the entire testimony. However, the prosecution in this case did a very, very good job of providing enough corroboration for Michael Cohen, enough circumstantial evidence against Donald Trump for his guilt, that really they can attack Michael Cohen's credibility, and the jury could still find that they have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump is guilty.
Omarosa, I want to read something to you. There's this really interesting idea that the prosecution has talked about accomplice liability to sort of explain their case theory, right? So basically what they've said is, let's say a hitman hires, or a husband hires a hitman to kill his wife, and the husband may not be present when the hitman actually carries out the murder, but the husband is every bit as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger, even though he wasn't there. Can you follow that kind of logic, right? And a lot of the jurors said they did. You're the only one tonight who's actually worked with Donald Trump and seen how he works. Is that an effective and a realistic sort of allegory for how he operates? Is he a guy who gets his fingers in the spaghetti himself, or is he a person who often sort of sends other people out to do his dirty work so that he has plausible deniability later on?
Well, Jason, in that hypothetical scenario that you have just outlined, I think you've actually hit the nail on the head as to how Donald Trump strategically operates in a way to not get his hands dirty. He will give directives. He is very careful not to use email, for instance. He's careful not to write certain things down and have others to do that for him. And in this case, he had Michael carry out this really situation that was something that he wanted Michael to clean up for him, this porn star, this hush money. He wanted it taken care of because he did have a woman problem. And so that certainly tracks with how Donald Trump operates in his organization.
And I want a quick follow-up to that. This idea that Michael Cohen doesn't like Donald Trump. And again, lots of people who used to work for Donald Trump don't like him now. And as someone who used to work with him and now knows what kind of person he is, do you think the average person looks at that and says, well, I don't know if you're credible if you don't like your ex-boss? Do you think there's so many people who no longer like this man that that's not necessarily as much of a problem as it used to be?
Well, Jason, to that point, let's just start at the very top. His own vice president doesn't support him and like him. Half of his cabinet doesn't support him and like him. People like myself who worked with him and saw how he jeopardized our country, our democracy, don't happen to like him. I don't believe that that's a deal breaker for the jury because many of them may be sitting there and not like him. What really this comes down to is about justice and accountability. So regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump or how Michael Cohen feels about Donald Trump, can Donald Trump be held accountable for his alleged crimes? That's the true question here.
Right. It's not just about what Cohen thinks. It's like he's how the culture actually thinks about this guy. You know, Joe, I want to ask you this. So one of the things that I also think is a key piece of evidence here, if you're ever going to have a question about whether Trump did this or whether he was involved, is this handwritten note from Alan Weisselberg. And this is amazing to me that, again, you know, I'm thinking of The Wire. I can't believe you're taking notes on a criminal conspiracy here. It's a bank statement from First Republic with handwritten notes from Alan Weisselberg on how to reimburse Cohen. $180,000 grossed up to $360,000 with an additional $60,000 bonus added together and divided by 12 months. The total amount Weisselberg, I mean, the guy writes the whole thing out here and makes it clear that Cohen couldn't have been operating on his own because he was expecting reimbursement. Is this the kind of thing that a jury will see and be able to connect the dots, or do they still need to be handheld? Because to me, this seems pretty obvious.
I think you'd be a great juror because it does connect the dots, but so does Michael Cohen. And so does all of the other witnesses that have woven a web that you can see how everything fits together. And it's not just Michael Cohen, who came across, I think, outperformed what everybody expected and will be believed by the jury. But he'll be believed partly, as you noted, because they have built a foundation around him that shows how everything he's saying is true and that the additions that he makes are the only logical conclusions you could draw from the foundation that's been built. When he says, yes, he knew about it. Yes, he knew there were false records. Those are things that the foundation has made it clear fit together. And so I think that he will be believed and that there will be a jury that believes this is the case where all the elements have been satisfied, that Donald Trump knew about the payment, he knew it was intended to help his election, and knew that the records were falsified so that he could get a tax benefit, so that it would be concealed, so that no one would know that he was doing an election violation.
Joe, I want to stay with you for a minute. So there was a congressional hearing today on the weaponization of government that you testified in. I want to play some sound from this, get your thoughts on the other side.
Mr. Costello, is Michael Cohen a liar?
That doesn't begin to describe him. He lies at every opportunity when it's in his favor. He said, I didn't want to embarrass Melania Trump. He said, that's why I decided to take care of this on my own. Right. I went back to that several times. You did this on your own? On my own. Did Donald Trump have anything to do with it? No. Did you get the money from Donald Trump? No. From any of his organizations? No. From anybody connected to Donald Trump? No.
Joe, first off, just talk a little bit about what your testimony was in this hearing. And second, you know, what purpose? I mean, what purpose do the Republicans really think they're accomplishing with this sort of C-SPAN marathon of a hearing that nobody else is going to pay attention to?
Well, first, let me say, Jason, you're making me relive one of the worst days of my life. It's so hard to sit there and not respond to the nonsense that's going on. The three Republican witnesses, but maybe especially Mr. Costello, it was painful. And to me, it was so obvious that on this day, they picked to assassinate the character of Michael Cohen. It was outrageous, everything he said. My testimony related to, they have called this hearing a lawfare weaponization of government. And honestly, other than Lawfare blog, I had to look up what lawfare meant. And it meant using the institutions of government to take down an opponent. And to me, this hearing was actually lawfare. They were doing it to hurt the ongoing trial, to interfere in this particular trial. My testimony was more about the fact that it used to be that facts mattered, and that the distinctions between the indictment decisions of the special counsel for Mr. Trump and for President Biden are based on not a different standard, but on different facts. And that if anyone would pay attention to the facts, it was justified to make the decision that you would not indict President Trump. And it left you no decision except to indict Mr. Trump, because Mr. Trump not only concealed, he hid, he obstructed. Those are the reasons that the aggravating factors lead to a indictment. And so it was, my point was, no one is above the law, including a former president. And that the differences in decisions have nothing to do with the Department of Justice cheating or showing a bias. It has to do with the facts that apply to the standard. So the standard's the same. There's no weaponization. And I thought that the testimony attacking Michael Cohen was completely unfair.